Bitches. Terence McKenna, theory called the stoned ape theory.
Pleasure to be here.
I started out my academic career as an art historian with a major in Asian languages, and that took me to Asia and sort of disillusioned me with traditional spiritual approaches in the Asian style. And I reconnected then with my childhood love of nature and pretty much abandoned the humanities and went into the sciences. But by then it was too late to become a real scientist, and I was too tainted by my time again among the poets and the artists. So I had to become a very soft, hard scientist.
That must be a rush for you, though.
I did a lot of traveling around looking for a viable, vibrant, numinous approach to spiritual reality, and the only place I found it was in the Amazon basin, where, as you know, there are extremely archaic groups of people.
Fascinating pieces of evidence in South America have come out recently about these channels and pathways that they've found in the Amazon.
Yeah. Architectural ruins dripping with globular jewels, strange people who never submitted themselves to the historical process the way the peoples of the Middle East and Europe did. And there flourishes, through the use of chemically complex plants, techniques and traditions for accessing a world invisible to the rest of us, a world of forces and information that is transhuman, supernatural, if the word means anything.
What do you think consciousness is?
Consciousness is the domain of immediate experience. How are we going to save this planet? How are we going to take the lethal cascade of toxic, technological, and ignorance-producing habits that are loose on this planet and channel them toward some kind of a sane and livable world? Well, the answer is emerging in culture out of the collectivity of global consciousness. It is what I call the archaic revival. It is this very large turnover in the mass mind. Some people call it a paradigm shift. It's an effort to recover the sensory ratios, the feelings, and the attitudes of 15 to 20,000 years ago, before fear, before ego, before male dominance, before hierarchy, hoarding, warfare, propaganda, child abuse, all of these things.
What is going on today where this is such a hot topic? Like, what has happened? I mean, what has been the shift in our culture? Can you find a patient zero? Was there an initial explosion that led to the domino effect? Like, what is it that's leading to such an utter fascination culture-wide about gender and sex now? It's like these are the big hot topics of today. It's gender, sex, race, and those things seem to, I guess, also sexual orientation, gender, sex, race, sexual orientation. Those three. I mean, those four. It's just unprecedented in our time that these are the most widely talked about subjects across the board with young people. And people that are virtue signaling and people that want to be, air quotes, woke. Like, what's causing this?
Religions and political systems and xenophobic theories of racial superiority, all this crap that haunts the human historical adventure, means we have not addressed the deeper levels.
Television
We all know that the average television program is gauged to the 15-year-old mind, but what are the consequences of that? We're creating a population of people who are infantile and idiotic, and yet we call ourselves a democracy. You only have to study democracy 10 minutes. I mean, read John Stuart Mill to understand that the precondition for democracy is a sophisticated and educated citizenry. If you have one person, one vote, but no educated citizenry, then you have a mob being led by various icons and images manipulated by fascists. It's a very disturbing situation.
And not hindered by all of the things that we're hindered by, like our egos and our nonsense and our insecurities and our civilization and culture.
Yes. We studied the psychoactive plants of the world, especially the New World tropics, where they seem to be concentrated. We were simultaneously exalted by the realization that we had found a doorway, a real doorway into hyperspace, and there flourishes, through the use of chemically complex plants, techniques and traditions for accessing a world invisible to the rest of us. So,
do you know the story of the Amanita muscaria?
Yes.
Amanita muscaria is the most fascinating one to me, because that's the one that looks like Santa Claus.
Gordon Wasson, who some of you may know as the discoverer, the modern discoverer of the mushroom cults of Mexico, founder of the science of ethnomycology, believed to his dying breath that soma was Amanita muscaria, the red-topped, white-speckled amanita. This is a mushroom which has a major role in Tungusic and Arctic shamanism, but to say, as Wasson did, that this is the supreme entheogen of all time is not supported by the evidence, I think. Wasson's own efforts to become intoxicated on Amanita muscaria were not successful. My efforts have not been successful. Occasionally you will hear anecdotal evidence. Someone will tell a story about eating Amanita muscaria that obviously they had a staggering breakthrough to a rupture of plane, as Merceliod in his wonderful phrase. But it's extremely undependable.
Yeah. That is the subject of a book by a guy named John Marco Allegro, who was one of the head scholars for deciphering the Dead Sea Scrolls. He deciphered the Dead Sea Scrolls for 14 years. He was an ordained minister, but he was also, in his study of theology, became agnostic. And when he started realizing that there was all these different religions that had similar stories, and he was, found all these different connections, and he was trying to like figure out what the origins of all these stories were. Well, after studying the Dead Sea Scrolls for, I think it was 14 years before he wrote this book, he decided that all of Christianity was a massive misunderstanding, and what it was originally about was these stories, this collection of stories that were about fertility rituals and psychedelic mushroom use. And he traced the word Jesus back to an ancient Sumerian word that was a mushroom covered in God's semen. I don't know if this is true, but this is one of the things that the pot aficionados always used to say, is that, when a priest walks down the aisle and they have that thing that they swing and there's burning incense inside of it, that used to be weed. That's what they used to do.
We tend to think of cannabis as a recreational drug, but that's because in the 20th century we always smoke our cannabis. In the 18th and 19th century, cannabis was eaten, and jellied forms of cannabis that were eaten, judging by the prose of people like Theodore Gautier, Baudelaire, Fitzhugh Ludlow, and people like that, it was as powerful as LSD, without doubt. I mean, these people were being swept into titanically alien dimensions. Well, I don't think I would be who I am if it weren't for cannabis, and it hasn't particularly affected my memory. I'm actually the most devoted, on a lifetime scale, the person most devoted to cannabis that I've ever known is myself. I mean, when I lived in Asia, I used to set my alarm for 2 a.m. to smoke because I couldn't go from midnight to 5. It's interesting, see, it was early on, it's one of the oldest domesticated plants. It was early on associated with cordage and fiber. And it's strange that all the words that associate to narrative are also words about weaving. I mean, you weave a story, you unravel a yarn, you unthread a situation, you untangle a situation. The parallelism is very old in all European languages, this association between narrative and fiber, which means hemp. So I sort of see it as the pilot. I certainly think cannabis should be legalized, and that if every serious alcoholic were encouraged to be a pothead and other drug abusers encouraged toward pot, the problem with pot from a societal point of view is that it is psychedelic enough that, like all psychedelics, it erodes loyalty to cultural values.
It's just this compulsive need to constantly change your state of mind. It's so far along in your life, and these behavior patterns become so like tight grooves that are carved into your psyche. And then as you become an adult, then you start to learn, like, oh, there's got to be a better way to handle this. Let me figure out how to do this. And it's almost like getting a car when you're really young. And not learning how to drive until you're like in your 20s.
Right.
Yes.
So you're just driving this thing. It's smashing into trees and grinding the gear.
Worry presupposes that you understand what's going on. And I think it's safe to say that we do not have a clue as to what is going on. We can't even tell whether it's a happy ending or a catastrophe. We can't tell whether we're slamming into the wall of our cultural limits at 50,000 miles an hour, or we're about to go hand in hand off to the galactic center with the human soul as companion and vehicle.
People say, well, I'm straight edge now. I don't do anything, and that's it. Discuss this. We don't have people like you or centers where people can go, where people can become educated on the proper way to use these drugs or medicines, or whatever you want to call them, these compounds, and get something out of them that can really be beneficial.
Right. Found any real solution other than hold your nose and jump. But the issue is surrender. This is something real. And I'm not like, I don't advocate it, you know, people, like sometimes there are people who are disappointed because they say, well, how often do you do it? Well, the answer is not very often. I mean, if I can get it in a couple or 3 times a year, I feel like I'm hitting it pretty hard. And the more successful it is, the less often you have to do. There are a lot of people in our society, and each of us in our own way at different times, who have within us this neurotic and infantile creature that can't face it alone, and that this going it alone thing is very important. You know, Plotinus, the great Neoplatonic philosopher, he spoke of the mystical experience as the flight of the alone to the alone. And in the psychedelic experience, there is this issue of surrender, because a lot of people want to diddle with it. They want to be able to say they did it, but they don't ever want to face an actual moment where they put it all on the line. And yet the whole issue with this stuff is to let it lead, to let it show what it wants to show.
What are you telling me about acid?
I mean, I was in my early 20s when I encountered LSD. Made experience years ago I took LSD one evening with a bunch of people, and it was fairly casual and social, and smoked a bunch of weed, and this went on for a couple of hours, and it didn't really ever seem to come on, or it just seemed to be very light. And then I climbed on my motorcycle and went home and decided I would go to bed, and I decided that I would smoke one last joint before going to bed. And I had one of those stand-up electrical resistance heaters that you get in at the Salvation Army, you know, if you're a poor student. And I said, so I turned it on as I started to smoke this joint, and it was badly wired, and it made this sound like, and as I began to listen to this sound, I went to lizard land, and I entered into this completely coherent thing which lasted for hours about this world inhabited by these intelligent reptilian beings. And we went through their art, their history, their theories of jewelry making, their philosophy, their polity, their science, their religion, their fashion, and it was like endless stuff about this very specific reptilian world. Well, then later I tried again. I took LSD with my arm around my heater. This was and I could never really find my way back, you know, which is a typical phenomenon of higher dimensional phase space. Ralph taught me, you know, doing the reverse of what you did doesn't steer you back to where you started. You have to find your way forward through the matrix. My most satisfying LSD experiences were while smoking hash, and then that really did do something interesting, sent it skittering off in these wonderful visionary directions. For instance, psilocybin is, to my mind, in many ways the most anomalous, because, number one, this thing about how it speaks, it does speak, and none of the others do. I mean, the others you may occasionally, in years of fiddling, get a sentence or two, but the mushroom just is voluble. It just comes on and raves, you know, and sometimes you even, and people have said to me, it really does rave. I mean, you have to take a heroic dose under the right conditions to really smash through. I mean, people do not take enough mushrooms. They take pissant amounts, and then they claim that they're initiates. You must take a measured 5 dried grams on an empty stomach. Why do some plants become discovered by human beings and become the objects of cults which last millennia, and others are never discovered at all? Listen carefully, and I'll avoid a lawsuit and you'll avoid a tummy ache. The morning glory seeds which are sold in garden stores here are the morning glory that you want, the blue, heavenly blue morning glory. But seed companies have dipped these seeds in a poison specifically to keep you from getting high off these morning glory seeds. So the morning glory seeds can be floured in your brawn grinder and then mixed into applesauce or a milkshake or some thick medium, because actually it's pretty disgusting. High molecular weight solvents like chloroform and petroleum ether tend to be slightly tricky for the non-chemist to work with. And then you get visual streaming, which, if you've never seen this, it's basically, it looks like you're driving through a bunch of after images. There are these purple and chartreuse lights sliding past, and when you stare forward, you can see them sliding past. After about 10 minutes of that, and possibly a hit of cannabis, it becomes more explicit, and you move into the realm of what's called hypnagogia. Hypnagogia are dancing mice, little colored candies, pieces of ribbons, gears, screws, the trivia, the impedimentia of the phantasmagoria of your mind, you know. Africa is Ibogaine, or Tabernantha Iboga, the so-called Bawiti cults of Zaire and Gabon. Now, this is the psychedelic about which we in the West probably know the least. It has spawned knockout. It's a powerful hallucinogen, and it's not only a powerful hallucinogen, but it has a component of sexual excitation to it, which is ancillary and unusual. If you actually have ever looked into the subject of aphrodisiacs, the truth is there ain't any. There are things which cause genital itching and prolonged erection and so forth, but a true aphrodisiac, a chemical which would impel you to want to have sex, there's nothing quite like that, except this Tabernantha iboga is very interesting. We tend to think of an aphrodisiac because we tend to break our heart away from our genitals as a kind of a cold thing, I think. But when you talk to these people who are taking ibogaine, they don't talk about aphrodisiac. They say this causes open-heartedness, one-heartedness, they call it. And one-heartedness is what they are striving for in the Bawiti cult. And they, in modern times, we have a horror of opium. I mean, people are amazed that I even mention it in the same breath, but it doesn't hurt to remind ourselves that this virulently addictive substance, opium, was not even noticed to be addictive by anybody until 1627, when the English physician John Playfair, for the first time, commented that opium, once taken over a long period of time, then there would be a requirement that it be taken through datura, horse of a different color. I don't consider it a true hallucinogen. I would classify it as a deliriant. I know that it's very big in magic, and I understand why, because it's a confusant. And magic depends on confusion. Even stage magic depends on a certain confusion. You're looking in the wrong place and so forth. And what datura does, it's very hard to keep control of it. It erodes the core processes of the self so that you lose track of who you are, where you are, what exactly has happened. I took datura several times in Nepal and had very strange experiences. I mean, they're not like other psychedelic experiences. I remember sitting in my little room in Bodenoth on the 3rd floor, and I had an open window. And I was sitting there alone, waiting for this stuff to come on, and then my mind would wander, and I would think, it's not working, it's just some kind of, it's crap, it's not working. And then I would kind of lose attention, and these literally ghost-like forms, wraiths, would come floating in my window like in a cartoon, and they were carrying large sheets of newsprint. And they would release this newsprint, and it would flutter down across the room and like land across my lap. And I would fall forward and be reading these stories, and as I read, I would realize, this is it. This is the answer. It's, shadows. About a half an hour. But then in fact, this is what I referred to this morning when I said I've had many experiences where I was glad nobody else was there because I felt they would become alarmed and then create a brouhaha. Boy, I'm glad nobody else is here. And this went on for hours. And I just felt, it's telling me I'm not for it. They say, these things choose you. and it was clearly not for me. But then I observed other people, and they didn't seem to be handling it too well either.
Well, I don't know what it is, but if you wanted to get real woo-woo, you would call it some sort of a chemical gateway into another dimension. Or to
What is salvia divinorum, and where do we get it, and what do we do with it? The first psychedelic ever discovered since LSD, active in the microgram range. The plant is like a house plant. It can be grown anywhere. It can be grown in Hawaii like crazy outside. It looks like Joe plant. The way I like to do it is I take between 16 and 20 leaves, and I lay them down and I remove the mid-vein with my fingernail. This is because this is how the Indians told the anthropologist who busted the story. This is exactly how they do it. They remove the mid-vein. And then what I do is I make this little soft pancake pile of leaves, and it folds down to just about one enormous mouthful. It's the absolute limit of what I can get in my mouth. And then what I do is I lay down in silent darkness where I don't move. You just lie there in the dark. It will begin to do what's called streaming. You know what that is? It's these after-image colored purple and chartreuse overstuffed things floating by in your visual field. That's called streaming. Then within a minute or two, it will become dramatically peculiar, visually. That's what's happening. Everything is stretching and falling away and sort of interdimensional. I've done it a number of times, and once I got it to work, it's worked every time since. And I think it's a very interesting hallucinogen. The last time I did it, it was amazing because in a darkened room with moonlight streaming through a big skylight, there was no hallucinogenic activity whatsoever. I mean, that's where you would expect it. You know, you have all the edges, the moonlights, the perfect situation for hallucination. Nothing. Crystal clear. But when you close your eyes, instantly, there are complex three-dimensional hallucinations moving and rotating. So quickly does it form that you have the impression it's like turning on a light in a darkened room. And unlike DMT or psilocybin, where usually when you get these weird hallucinations, you can just sit and look at it and think about it. Say, I am seeing a strange hallucination. This is legal to talk about, legal to take, legal to give to people. I could smoke it right now. Because it's easy to do 10 times too much, 20 times. And we have no human data on the pure compound. Now, human data on the plant, we have these Indians. But everything at this point about this plant is mysterious. Everything. For example, naturally, you have this plant, it's in shamanic usage, so you go to the people. Say, you know, what is the name of this plant? They say to the Mazatecs who use it. They say, we call it ojos de la pastora, eyes of the shepherdess. Now there's, well, is it a good trip? Well, that's a good question. A very well-known researcher took it, who has a big academic position and so forth, and he told me it was a complete psychotic break. He said, I had no idea who I was or what I was doing.
Legit sage, like that can't be good for you. You know, I think that people need structure. I definitely think that people need family and community and all those good things. But when it comes to religion, it's like, which one is right?
Is the less pseudo-Christian material, this exegetical and mystical material that just takes off, that is proto-hermetic,
Some of it shows traces of Indian philosophies, transmigration of souls, yogic practices. Some of it reads almost like Maria Sabina's mushroom chants. There's one text called The Voice of the Thunder that has a meter and a rhythm that is precisely Maria Sabina. So Gnosticism is the general banner under which all of this stuff can be placed. Gnostics believe the central tenet of Gnosticism, and it's hard to put this across because modern Gnostics are such cheerful people, but they've forgotten their real roots. The central perception of Gnosticism, no matter how you slice it, is that we don't belong here, that we are strangers, that something terrible happened, and that accounts for why we're here, that we were destined for a much better deal, and something went terribly, terribly wrong. It takes different forms. Some Gnostic mythologies are fairly straightforward. Some are fairly Baroque. The one that I enjoy is one of the more Baroque ones. The 2nd century Gnostic Bishop Valentinius had this notion that there were 36 archons. They are demons of progressively lessening power that interpose themselves between man and a true vision of God. And the last of the archons, the 36th archon, was Sophia, and the only of the archons that was female. There's a tremendous sexual ambivalence in Gnosticism, which we can talk about, which is resolved in different ways. But anyway, the 36th archon is Sophia. She looked upward toward the higher God and saw him bring forth creation, of which she was the final manifestation. And in her heart, an avarice grew, a wish to create in the same manner as the highest and hidden All-Father. And she brought forth, it's described as an abortion. She self-fertilized herself. She did not understand the requisites of creation, and she turned inward into herself, and she brought forth a monstrosity. And this monstrosity is the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, Jehovah. And when she saw what she had done, that she had brought forth this monstrosity, she flashed through a whole bunch of emotions very quickly. Horror, guilt, rage, fear, agony, like that. And these emotions of the errant Sophia condensed as the material world over which Ildabuath was then made Lord. So the entire material universe is seen as the condensed emotional debris of the horror of the 36th archon upon witnessing her own creation, who is then made God over this universe.
Well, what people experience when it comes to the word depression, how much of it is their life going bad, tragedy, poor health, bad job choices, how much of it is some sort of a weird genetic thing, how much, I mean, there's so many variables as to what causes depression, but such a giant number.
The last thought I want to leave you with, which is a sort of a coincidentia oppositorum thought, because it will bum some and exalt others, is the one thing that I've learned from psychedelics that seems secure over all the decades and the, embracing one idea, one ideology after another. The one thing that seems secure is a truth that is hard to hear in the context of a dominator culture with an obsession with the material world. And that truth is that nothing lasts. Nothing lasts. You know, your enemies will fade, your friends will fade, your fortune, your poverty, your disappointments, your dreams, everything is in the process of changing into something else. So your agony is about to be assuaged. On the other hand, your happiness is about to be destroyed. So the obligation that comes out of this realization is an obligation to the immediate moment, to this thing that I've been calling the felt moment of immediate experience. It isn't who you were, or what you were, or who you will be, or what you will be. It's the felt moment of immediate experience. And this has been robbed from us by media and by our tendency to denigrate ourselves, to see the world in terms of the great ones, not here, whoever they are, Aristotle, Madonna, Jesus, whatever your particular bent is. The overcoming of neurosis, of unhappiness, of toxic lifestyles is the felt presence of immediate experience in the body, in the moment. And, you know, psychedelics, sexuality, gastronomy, sport, dance, these are the things which put you in the felt presence of the moment. And that's really all you ever possess. Your memories are eroding away. The futures you anticipate will mostly not come to pass. And the real richness is in the moment. And it's not necessarily some kind of be here now, feel good thing, because it doesn't always feel good, but it always feels. It is a domain of feeling. It's primary. Language is not primary. Ideology is not primary. The propagation of future and past vectors is not primary. What's primary is the felt presence of experience, and that is the source of love, and that is the source of community.
Patents for UFO type, see if you can find what those are, because they're developing, or at least they've attempted to develop some sort of gravitational drive that would indicate that at least there's been some thought about developing a craft like that. Now, if you put a person in one of these things and you shot them off thousands of miles an hour, they turn into jello. I've always said that if aliens are real, Earth is the Tijuana of outer space. They come down here when they're fucked up and they want to see a show.
The flying saucer, I believe, is an image of this tool that haunts the human experience of historical concrescence. It haunts the psyche of human beings and the skies of Earth, because like the bar ball spinning in the club, it is a precursive reflection of the tool at the end of time. The people who got this right are the alchemists of the 15th and 16th century, who believed that out of matter you could coax a universal substance that would be a perfect panacea. It would be all things to all people. It would cure all diseases, confer immortality, change lead to gold. The blind would see, the halt would walk, the dead would rise. And this ideal was immediately in place before the birth of modern science. There's a great deal we don't know about life on Earth. We don't know when the fungi entered into the evolutionary chain. We don't know what kind of intelligence is really possessed by the cephalopods, the shell-less mollusks that include the octopi. The intelligence of dolphins has been studied by Lilly and others. One possible view of the flying saucer is that it is a kind of projection from the consciousness of the planet, that it is Gaia, that we, as egocentric beings, clarify our relationship to the unconscious, then I think the flying saucer is going to remain quintessentially mysterious. And this was Jung's view.
I was watching a talk that you were giving, and you were talking about the growth of innovation and technology and the entire history of life on Earth, and what a short period of time humans have been here, and then during what a short period of time, what a stunning amount of innovation and how much change we've enacted on the Earth in just a blink of an eye. And
technologies and our flaws, like greed, like vanity, have always made hellish marriages with each other, and our best intent to be decent people, to raise our children well, to be present for our neighbors in times of pain and so forth and so on, are simply dragged along by the shadow and its obsessive relationship to the technologies which it produces. You know, McLuhan is famous for saying no technology in history has ever been put in place with even a partial understanding of what its consequences would be. Not the automobile, not the printing press, not the phonetic alphabet, and certainly not biotechnology and computers. And each one of these technologies has exalted and enriched the lives of a group of people and plunged other groups of people into hells previously unimagined. I mean, the printing press creates the whole notion of literacy, literature, the class of intelligentsia, so forth and so on, but it also creates propaganda, advertising, the mechanisms that are used to support repressive forms of government and marketing. So, again, what I've said at various times in these talks is it's easy to sketch out dilemmas. It's almost impossible to offer reassuring closure. Whitehead said it's the business of the future to be dangerous. Of course, he said that in 1920 when it wasn't nearly as dangerous as it is now. Had he been staring down the barrel of atomic weapons, gene therapy, and so forth and so on, he might have felt differently.
In this day and age, like you said, we're so accustomed to having any boredom alleviated by our phone. And that this is a trend that as technology becomes more and more invasive, and with these new technologies as they emerge, that this is going to be worse?
And I think I said to you the little joke about how a computer is simply a drug that you can't swallow.
Well, this tells you that we have been perverted by our technologies and that our essential humanness has been severely undermined. How to reclaim this? Well, probably beginning by talking about it. It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant.
Interesting. What else should we be concerned with? Should we be concerned with anything that North Korea is doing? If you lived in a shithole like North Korea, where every day you're under the oppressive boot of a military dictatorship, maybe you'd be ready to die too. You're like, it's either escape to South Korea or die.
Been thinking about it, about this war, about the 60s, about Vietnam, about how LSD played a major role in stopping that war by forcing people to confront what they were really doing, by empowering people to get together in large groups and say, we won't stand for it, we won't put up with it. And aside from all the horrors of war, which you have had rehearsed for you over the past 2 weeks, what really is a pisser about this is that it means for people my age and older, they didn't hear us. If you can take the psychedelic and political struggles of the 1960s and boil it down into one phrase, what did we stand for? We stood for making love, not war.
Alex Jones, I love you, buddy, for real. But you say some silly shit. That's where this all comes from. Doesn't mean I don't love you. You're a great guy. but there's some shit that's just silly. It's a waste of time. You know, that's one of those things that's just a waste of time. Does that make sense?
I'm with
How many yards was it, Jamie? Find out how many yards Oswald had to shoot to hit Kennedy. But it's totally doable. And people that say that's not, you're crazy.
183 meters is what I just found.
183 meters. What is that in yards?
It's about 200 yards.
Is it?
That's what this says. I don't know if this is what the accurate measurement was, but that's what I just found.
That's interesting. People that say that you can't like load a gun that fast, maybe you can't. I bet you someone can do it faster than you.
Yeah.
I've seen a guy who used to be like a full-on 9/11 truther, and one of the things that he found out was that the version of Tower 7 that most people see is a version that's very quick. It implodes. Not only that, gravity's not real and dinosaurs aren't real. I think there's real conspiracies, you know, but I think there's some that, you know, people just get caught up in looking for conspiracies in everything, and after a while it's exhausting.
I think conspiracy theory is a very disempowering thing, because what it says is you can't control the world, or it's more difficult to control the world than you think it is. Not so. I've had a very different experience. My experience with the corridors of power, if you want to put it that way, is that there are an immense number of clueless people. It's almost like McKenna's law. It's that as you advance in social hierarchy, the percentage of smart people does not increase. So, you know, we could now, let's move to a cabinet meeting of the Clinton administration. There are as many stupid people, truly moronic people, sitting in that room as there are sitting in this room. It doesn't seem to make any difference, because people don't find their seats according to intellectual or social merit. Every human situation is bedeviled by morons.
What about ketamine? What do I think about it? Well, different things. First of all, this is a psychedelic drug that's called a dissociative anesthetic. It was used as a veterinary and children's anesthetic from the early 60s onward, and it was only slowly was it realized that at low doses there were peculiar psychic phenomena, and when done as an anesthetic, it's done 600 ml IV push. That means straight into the vein under pressure as fast as you can, 600 milliliters, which would be just like being hit by a truck. But when it's done for its, I don't like to say recreationally, so when it's done for its psychic effects, it's done like 100 milliliters IM into the muscle. And it's a troubling psychedelic, because a lot of people, I think, are doing it who have never done any other. And I think that would be very, very misleading. When I did it, my first reaction was complete amazement that here was a category of experience that I had no idea existed. In other words, it was a slot on the bookshelf that I didn't realize was there. It is not like mescaline, not like LSD, not like psilocybin, not like DMT, not like ayahuasca, originally on my part, so you don't have to take it from me. The first one is that it's very easy. The first thing that happens after you've done ketamine is you cease to be concerned that you've done ketamine. That's a funny thing. On these tryptamine hallucinogens, you are fully aware that you've taken a drug, that you're walking on eggshells, that you should keep yourself alert to what's going on, and in other words, it puts you on your toes. You know you're in a dimension of risk and opportunity, and you comport yourself that way. On ketamine, your definitions dissolve so completely that it's a major accomplishment to realize that you're a human being on a drug. You keep discovering and losing that realization. You keep saying, oh yes, that's what it is. I'm somebody and I'm stoned somewhere. With it, because it's important to overcome, and that is, it's very state-bounded, which is a term that the psychologist Roland Fisher coined, which means you can't remember anything about it. It's like an intense dream where you're intensely dreaming and the alarm goes off, and as you stumble to the shower, it's just, and there's nothing there. And ketamine is very much like this.
Because in our lifetime, we've recognized that things move fast, but they seem normal. Like, it seems normal to have an iPhone.
Honestly,
right?
I don't know.
The only thing that feels a little slow to me is virtual reality. Because
to me, the exciting thing about virtual reality is that we will be able to show each other our dreams. It's another way of objectifying the soul, what we've been talking about. You know, a child of 5 given a virtual reality toolkit will begin to build their world. And by the time you're 20, your world will be, I don't know, the size of Manhattan. And that's you, that's yours. And nobody can walk those streets without your permission. And if you love someone and you give them permission, they can literally walk into your dreams. Your dreams when you were 5, when you were 10, when you were 15, your fascist phase, your Mozart phase, your, whatever. And that is that 4-dimensional centipede of the soul that I'm talking about. It's not it itself, but it's an imprint of it, a download of it. We will build our dreams and then live in them. Imagine that you could live in any way, in any fashion you wanted, in any environment you wanted. In other words, design your own flying saucer, let's say. Well, at first, if you're like me, at first it's just very nice. It's Italianate modern or something, and we'll hang my favorite Pollock over here. And in other words, at first it's just as if I had won the lottery, and like I'm suddenly staggeringly rich, and so I can. But then you say, well, but wait, I can do anything. And then you realize, oh my God, I'm in the imagination. I can have it any way I want. And it's a dizzying prospect. I mean, it's very interesting. Would you have a body? What kind of body would it be? How would you spend your days? Would you build the world's greatest art collection? Or, you could become a bumblebee. And it's such a dizzying thing when it begins to open up in front of you. And then finally you realize that with that kind of power, if you had that kind of power, there is an automatic desire, I think, to begin to pull it in and say, well, I think I'll not wear clothes. I think I'll live in nature. I think I'll, in other words, the stuff obsession falls away when you can have anything, and you begin to find your way back to some kind of bedrock. And I think I've told you, or I've told some of my groups, my vision of a kind of perfect future is a world where everyone is living as Amazon rainforest Indians live, or close to that level. In other words, naked, very little work to do, plenty of food. Everybody is sexually comfortable with themselves and everybody else, so forth and so on. And what it looks like is an aboriginal paradise.
The question is, we look at consciousness and we look at like an intelligent entity. When you experience what happens when you take dimethyltryptamine, you throw all that out the window because the environment itself is not. It's not defined. It's fluid, meaning that it's changing constantly, but yet it seems far more vivid and far more real. And there are these things that are there, and they communicate with you, and they seem to be really communicating with you, and they seem to also know you, you can't. Like, you could say that's a well of souls. That's what happens when you die. That's the afterlife. That's a parallel dimension. These are aliens. That's how they can communicate with us. They're non-physical life forms that exist in these realms of light. We don't know. How did you find out about DMT?
Hash smokers are greatly favored in this endeavor because you really need leather lungs for this. The problem is that people will cough or not be able to hold it in. You take 2 hits in a situation where your clothes have been loosened and you can just flop backward when you need to. You take 2 hits. Now, many people miss the point because after 2 hits, you feel completely peculiar. You feel as though your body is undergoing some strange kind of anesthesia. All the air has been pumped out of the room. This is the visual acuity thing I talked about last night. The colors jump up. The edges sharpen. And at that point, people say, whoa, wow, it's really coming on strong. And then what you have to do is you have to take one more enormous hit. And this separates the intrepid from the casual, believe me. Because most people, and the facilitator doesn't want to lean on the person. You say, damn it, take the 3rd hit. And it's saying, no, I feel completely weird. Say, I know you feel weird, but take the 3rd hit. Well, if you can coax somebody into that, then what happens is you close your eyes and you see the ordinary warm brown back, closed eyelid scenario. And then these colors begin racing together. And it forms this mandalic, floral, slowly rotating thing, which I call the chrysanthemum. This is a place in the trip that you want to see as you go by it. The chrysanthemum forms, and you watch it for like 15 seconds. If it doesn't give way, then you didn't do enough. You have to do more. One more hit usually will do it. Well, then what happens is it like physically propels you through this chrysanthemum-like thing, and there's a sound like a saran wrap bread wrapper being crumpled up and thrown away, that crackle. A friend of mine says, this is your radio intellecty leaving through the anterior fontanelle at the top of your head. I don't know what it is, but it's something is being... Yeah, right, that's what it is. And then there's this very defined sense of bursting through something, a membrane. And on the other side, and this is now, remember, my experience, on the other side, as you break through, there's a cheer. There's a whole bunch of entities waiting on the other side. And they, that Pink Floyd song, the gnomes have learned a new way to say hooray. Well, it's that place. It's those gnomes. And you burst into this space, and they're saying, how wonderful that you're here. You come so rarely. We're so delighted to see you. And one of the things about DMT that's really puzzling is, in a sense, it doesn't affect your mind. In other words, you don't change. for instance, if you take ketamine, the very first thing you notice before the trip hits is you notice that you no longer are anxious about having taken ketamine. You just sort of, anxiety leaves you. That means it's affecting your mind. It's doing something to the judgmental machinery. DMT doesn't lay a hand on the judgmental machinery. You break through into that space exactly who you were before breaking through. And the usual reaction of most people is something like, and you think, God, heartbeat, normal. Pulse, normal. Everything's normal. Yeah, everything's normal. Oh, God. Because these things are there, and they're hammering at you. And they come forward. They're like jeweled, self-dribbling basketballs. And there are many of them. And they come pounding toward you, and they will stop in front of you and vibrate. But then they do a very disconcerting thing, which is they jump into your body. They jump into your body, and then they jump back out again. And the whole thing is going on in this very high-speed mode where you're being presented with thousands of details per second, and you can't get a hold on, you say, my God, what's happening? And these things are saying, don't abandon yourself to amazement, which is exactly what you want to do. You just want to go nuts with how crazy this is. They say, don't do that. Don't do that. Pay attention. Pay attention to what we're doing. Well, what are they doing? Well, what they're doing is they're making objects with their voices. They're singing structures into existence. These things are, and what they will do is they offer things to you. Say, look at this, and as your attention goes toward these objects, you realize that what you're being shown is impossible. It's impossible. It's not simply intricate, beautiful, and hard to manufacture. It's impossible to make these things. The nearest analogy would be to the Fabergé eggs or something like that. But these things are like the toys that are scattered around the nursery inside a UFO or something. Celestial toys. And the toys themselves appear to be somehow alive. The toys themselves can sing other objects into existence. So what's happening is there's just this proliferation of elf gifts. And the elf gifts are moving around singing, and the whole thing is directed toward, they're saying, do what we are doing. And they're very insistent. They say, do it, do it, do it. And you feel like a bubble. And now this is subjective. I mean, only 5% report this, but it happens to me. You feel like some kind of bubble inside your body that's beginning to move up toward your mouth. And when it comes out, it isn't sound, it's vision. You discover that you can pump stuff out of your mouth by singing, and they're urging you to do this. They say, that's it, keep doing it. And the whole thing is like, we're now at minute 4.5 with this stuff. And you speak in a kind of glossolalia. There's a spontaneous outpouring of syntax unaccompanied by what is normally called meaning. It's sort of, he ding wow wak saptivi muldektipi tinget wahaksiki pipinem wahavedektam bohagagetek. And this is accompanied by a modality, something seen. And they're saying, yes, do it, do it, do it. And then after a minute or so of this, the whole thing begins to collapse in on itself. And they literally begin to physically move away from you. And usually their final shot is they actually wave goodbye and they say, déjà vu, Deja vu.
You had that fantastic joke. It was a talk about that this monk had practiced the city of levitation. Do you remember this one?
Yes.
And that the Buddha came to town and he said, for the last 20 years I've practiced the city of levitation and I can now walk on water. And the Buddha said, yeah, but the ferry's only a nickel.
That's right.
Thank you very much for coming in here, man.
It was a pleasure.